Lecture 2 starts with social and cultural aspects of American history before 1877. Let's go over some of those. Number 1, Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny is simply the idea that it is our God-given right as a country, the United States, to go and conquer all areas in the continental United States, whether or not there's people on it at all. This is from the 1830s. A journalist named John O'Sullivan pens this phrase, and it carries with it lots of consequences for Native American tribes as well as any other people who might be already there. Religion tends to play a part as well in American history. There is something called the Second Great Awakening, which happens in the in the 1800s, and basically where you have a reawakening of what it means to be religious. How religion is going to impact America is going to be through the movement to abolish alcohol, as well as the movement to abolish slavery. It's going to be very important for the future. In terms of gender, there's not a lot of social equality going on here. Women are primarily looked at as being in charge of their own sphere of influence. What we have here, as you can see, is something called separate spheres. And this just basically means that men are in charge of what they have in terms of their domain, and women have everything in charge of what is their domain. A woman's place is in the home. A woman had no legal rights away from her husband, really. And that tends to be the dominant viewpoint here. Women voting? No way. Women in politics? Certainly not. It goes probably without saying that societally speaking, we have slavery and injustice against non-white people groups. Of course, all African Americans, most of them are subject to slavery. There are some free blacks, but certainly the overwhelming majority are slaves. Indians or Native Americans are seen as essentially infestations that must be cleaned out, and so therefore they are looked at as expendable and being removed at the expense of settlement by the white dominant culture. A picture of Native American relocation here. As you can see on the map, many lands were created that were supposed to be reservations for Native American peoples. Of course, we all know that none of this would have had to happen had United States settlers come across and pushed them out. So the Civil War, why did it happen? Well, first of all, there's really a series of failed compromises here, and what we see is that every time there's a new state or new territory that wants to become a state, the question always is it going to be free or slave? And in the map, you can see that there is a balance here in the 1850s between free states in the green and slave states in the yellow. But once you start having other territories, the question is all about what is the orientation of those states going to be? Is it going to be open to slavery by having the people vote on it, which is what this is, having people vote, called popular sovereignty? Is it going to be open to slavery by the principle of popular sovereignty? Is it going to be closed off to slavery? Or what is going to be the balance of power here between free states and slave states? Well, this comes to a head in 1860 when President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, on a very anti-slavery, spread of slavery platform, not an anti-racism platform, but an anti-spread of slavery platform, wins the 1860 presidential election. And if you look at the states that Lincoln got, of course, they're all free states. But one of the big reasons why he won is because the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats were basically split and could not match the power of the Republican Party, who dominates in the North, where the population centers are. But what this does, Lincoln's election sends a signal to the South to secede from the Union. The first state to do so is South Carolina, about 1 month right after President Lincoln is inaugurated president, because of his strong anti-slavery, anti-spreading of slavery rhetoric and spreading of slavery positions on issues. And apologize for this again, this should say Secession, South Carolina, December the 20th, 1860. Right after South Carolina declares that it's seceding from the Union, which is leaving the Union, which is something that has never ever been done before and is not it's not in the Constitution, and it's not in the Constitution, it's just not there. Other states follow suit in the Deep South, like Mississippi and Florida and Alabama and so on and so forth. Some states felt it wasn't going to be a smart idea to secede, and so that is why many of these states here, the border slave states, actually didn't secede. But secession meant that nobody knew what it meant at the time, but Abraham Lincoln did, and that is why a civil war was fought, because basically Lincoln believed that the only way that we're going to keep the Union together is if I declare war on the South and to bring them back into the Union, because what they're doing is unconstitutional. So I'm not going to, in the next slide, is going to go over every single battle here. Let's just talk a little bit about the Civil War really quick. We got 4 years here, 1861 to 1865. Rating the North and South. This is like a blowout, basically. The population is obviously winning in terms of the North. The money is in the North. The factories, the way to wage warfare is in the North. Yeah, the South has cotton, though. Anyways, but there's a lot of advantages for the North, and you would think on paper that the North would actually win this. They've got tons of railroad lines, as you can clearly see in this slide. They have just an enormous amount of ways to transport things, and with railroad lines also come communication networks. Okay, and so the telegraph, which is invented a little earlier, becomes very powerful in the war as well. Another graph showing you the resources between the North and South. I really hope you understand the idea here that on paper the North would defeat the South 100% of the time. On paper. I'm going to skip this slide because it's kind of the same as other things. But the exact opposite happens. To make the long story short, the first 2 years of the war, and by the way, this is the strategy, the Anaconda Plan, cut the Confederacy in half by basically controlling the Mississippi River here, blockade the South, don't let things get in, and then pressure on Richmond and Virginia right here, because Richmond is going to be their Confederate capital. But the exact opposite happens in the first 2 years of the war. The first 2 years of the war go absolutely horrible. I mean, horrible for the North. Lincoln goes through general after general firing people. It's like the New York Yankees from the 70s and 80s here. I mean, he just gets rid of this person, gets rid of this person, gets rid of this person. They can't get any decisive victories. And it's to the point in 1863 where the war isn't going the way the North wants it to go. The South has great generals. The South has just enough manpower to basically frustrate the northern states, and that's what happens. And so in 1863, though, and you can see the progress of the war here, the first 2 years are pretty stalemated. It's not like the North can gain a whole lot of victories and push into the South, and that doesn't really happen until 1863. But something big happens in 1863. In 1863, there's a battle called the Battle of Antietam Creek, and at the Battle of Antietam Creek, it's a very bloody day, as all Civil War battles are bloody. It's the most destructive and bloody war in the history of the United States, actually. And so after the Battle of Antietam Creek, Lincoln issues what's called the Emancipation Proclamation. And what this does is essentially frees all the slaves under Confederate control. This is huge because it changes the war from just a policing action to try to get the South back into the Union to a war against slavery. And that big victory sends the signal to Great Britain and France, who Great Britain has been watching this war very closely, and France also has, deciding whether or not they're actually going to recognize the Southern United States, the Confederacy, as an actual country. And this is very important, because that one victory turns the moral course of the war into a war to destroy slavery, which adds legitimacy to the cause of the Union and makes those foreign countries back off. And therefore, after that, it's all downhill from there. To make a very, very, very long story short, the South surrenders on April 9th, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse under the leadership of General Ulysses S. Grant here, and there's Robert E. Lee. When it was all said and done, the casualties were unimaginable. You can see the amount of wounded, the amount that died from wounds and disease, and the death rate very high. And when you look at the Civil War, if you add up every single war we've ever been into, there's never been a bigger, devastating war than the United States Civil War. Okay, that's the Civil War and other social, cultural, and aspects before 1877. In the next lecture, we'll talk about how to put the America back together, Reconstruction in 1870 up till 1877 and beyond.